Can see you anymore. Oh,
Alright, so just to clarify for the recording, it's me versus Ernst. I'm going to be defending anti-foundationalism. He's going to be probably agnostic or try to take the negation to that. The judge is gyro post track. So yeah.
Yeah.
Alright,
So
you have like
uh,
any qualms with like anti-foundationalism, or you just want me to give an argument for it?
yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and start off with the very first thing I'm gonna be saying is that when you say anti-foundationalism, you're just saying it's not the case that it's gonna be self-evident or basic truths in epistemology, right? So number one, I need to know the scope of the claim and the quantifier that tries to pick out a certain scope. Like, is it the case that it only applies under your account, or would it imply normatively speaking, or would it just be axiomatic in reference towards epistemology? On top of that, why is it the case that anything you talk about just seems to be truth tracking or at least truth preserving in some meaningful sense? And then when it comes to what would you call it? Yeah, then when it comes to the way you would even cash out the argument, I need to know what you need to observe to say that it's going to be the case that this is acceptable towards my view being evidential. And then when it comes to the evidence you're going to be positing, I need to know why it's the case that it actually meaningfully raises the rational credence to be posited in your view as opposed to other views. And even then, why is it the case that the evidence you would actually propose doesn't fit my view instead of yours? And then I'm not sure how you would even cash out this view,
Holy
right? Would it be the case that it can apply towards anything at all? I'm gonna just stop there for you.
Okay,
And also,
okay.
hold on, one more thing.
So
Yeah, I could just assume the negation as well. The kind of factor is going to be that coherentism, or sorry, foundationalism would be true. So why is it the case that your argument would necessarily go against foundationalism being true? Because you're going to say that does, because there's not going to be space under your account for such a thing to be like, snuck in. So based off that, the necessity claim would have to be argued. I want you to demonstrate how the necessity of your argument actually applies given the modal space we're talking about.
what
Yeah,
do
go
you
ahead.
even mean? Okay, hey, first, what do you mean by necessity of the argument? Secondly, I'll probably ask for clarity on like most of the shit that you're saying, but presumably, like the core of what you're trying to ask me for is just going to be, firstly for me to explicate my view, and then secondly for me to motivate the view over alternatives, or rather over foundationalism, which is the only other alternative, right? So for that, I'm just going to be taking Rorty's account, which is just going to be derived from anti-representationalism as opposed to representationalism. Um, and the way the argument goes is just that represent, or at least regular epistemology is the way that most people tend to understand it in the representational sense is going to be something which is not going to be necessary for epistemological talks or epistemological discourse. It's just going to be something which can be substituted for anti-representational or more pragmatic talks, right? So if it is the case that epistemology or knowledge is not going to be something that necessarily has to be truth tracking, but just can be something which functions as like this sort of how do I say this sort of anti-representational, this sort of functional thing, right? Then obviously it would just be the case that we would be led more towards anti-foundationalism, because the entire premise of foundationalism is that there are going to be more privileged bases for justification, right? So you're going to be saying that this basis is going to stand within a closer relation to the world than like everything which proceeds from it. Right? For example, let's say from conservatism, they would hold it to be that seemings are going to be things which stand in a higher priority or stand in a closer relation and representation to the world. Hence why it's a foundationalist view. It's going to be a representational view as well. So by denying that representationalist view, we're going to be performing this sort of like undercutting rebuttal to foundationalism, and we would just be left at anti-foundationalism, because that's just going to be the posit that there is no higher priority, or there is no um, better, or yeah, basically there is no basis, or there is no fundamental proposition or justificatory basis which has this higher priority or closer relation with the world, because that's not how we're evaluating it.
Yeah, so number one, when it comes to the necessity point, I kind of tried to steelman you and say why you want to say under your account. It's going to be the case that what you're talking about applies normatively speaking, or at least axiomatically speaking, universally speaking, because you don't want space for the negation of view to be flipped in towards your view, because that'll be a P and not a P, right? So that's what I mean by that. So I want you to demonstrate how it's the case that this claim or argument seems to necessarily apply over the modal space we're talking about, which is epistemic modality. And then the core thing is, well, number one, I don't grant that it's the case that if anything you're saying does go through, which I don't really grant, right? It's a case that we land at anti-foundationalism because I don't grant the dichotomy there. I don't know why I would. I think there could be more options than these two views. So even if under your account you seem to be negating, foundationalism, which I still don't grant. I don't grant that has a fall that anti-foundationalism would be true. That's the first thing. Secondly, now you talk about anti-representationalism, which just I guess the view that there's no like kind of like close truth tracking when it comes to these like basic beliefs or something like that. Something along those lines, right? Well, number one, I don't really see how it's going to be the case that you assuming it would actually infer anti-foundationalism, be the dichotomy not being granted. And then when you talk about how we can, sub this type of like epistemology for like, anti-rep or pragmatic talk. Well, yeah, maybe pragmatic talk, right? But I'm not seeing pragmatic talk actually throws out truth. I think it's gonna be the case that truth in the thinnest sense just means it's in a match state of affairs. And if you loop in practicality, the state of affairs would just be something which is practical or the way that things are done given typical work constraints. So I'm not seeing why it's the case that even looping that in would try to like, disaffirm representationalism and thus have it be the case that foundationalism is not going to be true. And on top of that, right, you're still not telling me the scope of the argument. I guess you're saying it's the way people typically observe or understand epistemology, but I'm not sure you have a reliable grasp on what that is. I want you to demonstrate how it is that your account actually accounts for the thing you're trying to claim it accounts for, given the scope. On top of that, how would you even evaluate that, and why is that going to be a thing which is reliably truth preserving, given the conversation that we're having? And then you try to say that if necessary, there's no like necessary truth preserving type of thing, right? Then it can be functioning as some kind of anti-representationalism, I guess, in some sense. Well, number one, right, the truth thing, whatever try to like truth bias thing you try to mention, I don't think it's going to be the case that it has to be necessarily spoken about, but I don't think the necessity being denied there is going to be a thing which actually infers your view or even implies it, materially speaking. I'm not sure why it's the case that your view is entailed by the truth talk not being a priority there in all scenarios, right? It could be the case that truth itself is not always the priority, but I don't see why it'd be the case that there's no kind of like, self-evident truth towards our view because foundationalism itself is going to say there's going to be some basic belief that we believe in, given our epistemology. So I'm not sure why to actually follow that, given that truth not the priority, that your view is true and my view is false, which is negation to your view. And on top of that, I gave you some other burdens earlier that you didn't really respond to. So I don't know how to repeat them for you because it's about evidence that you would have to observe to say that we have more reasons to believe your view. And on top of that, I'm going to be questioning the inferential processes you're going to be using for your view, right? Was the case that the evidence that you have would actually reliably raise the credence of your view being true? And on top of that, why would it actually imply your conclusion is going to be at least true, right? Because implication is going to say that.
I asked you to give me a moment. What the fuck?
What you said?
Because someone came in. You should look in chat, but like, yeah, I'll probably need to like repeat most of the shit you said because I had to go for a bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna just repeat it. Yeah, so the necessity claim, right? The reason why I positive necessity because you're gonna want to be saying that there's no, it's not going to be some foundational belief under your view, right? Because that'll be P and not P. So you have to argue why your view necessarily applies, given the modal scope, which is the epistemological scope, right? The epistemic modality, right? You have to demonstrate that your argument actually accounts exhaustively for everything within that modal space instead of just some of it. And then you talked about how presumably like the core I'm trying to get at, the core thing I'm trying to get at is like motivating your view over the alternatives. Well, number one, you said the only other alternative is going to be foundationalism. I don't really grant that. I think there could be other alternatives not accounting for. So I need to know why is the case that your epistemic access actually reliably in some sense reaches out to those other views. And then even then, right, I need you to tell me why it's the case that the other alternative fails given your account. I think you said that you're deriving your account from anti-representationalism. And well, number one, if you derive it from that, I want you to justify that. Number one, your position can even be derived from that. And on top of that, why be the case that foundational position is going to be one which is going to be true and or justified given the talk. You're gonna want to be saying that is true because if it's false, then the inference from it would also be false. So that has to be true for you to derive anything from it. So number one, you can justify anti-representationalism. And then you mentioned how regular epistemology is the way most people understand it, right? And I guess you said the representationalism is not going to be necessary given the epistemic talks. Well, I don't think that counts as evidence towards anything. I want you to demonstrate how it's evidential towards your view instead of my view. I want you to demonstrate how it actually implies that your view is going to be true instead of my view you being true. And when you say imply, I'm going to question the inferential process, right? Was it the case that this is given the evidence of the proposition, or at least the conversation at hand, that would actually have to be the case the conclusion is going to be true? And then you mentioned how you can sub the, I guess, rep talk for like anti-rep talk or pragmatic talk? Well, number one, I think truth in the broadest sense just means to match some state of affairs. So if we're to loop in pragmatic talks, that would just be the state of affairs. So truth talk in itself is not reliably looped out by pragmatism. So I'm not sure why would be the case that's going to be distinct, meaningfully speaking, from something that's going to loop in some truth talk. And then you said that if it's not going to be necessary, it can then be, functional as an anti-rep kind of thing. Like I'm not gonna say the whole entire work; it's kind of hard to say. But if the truth talking, if the truth type of like if the truth bias itself is not necessary, then it'd be the case that you can replace it with some kind of anti-rep functionality. But number one, I don't really grant that. I want you to tell me why it's going to be the case and how that actually follows, given that the truth talk can be replaced, and I don't think that it can be replaced at all, right? On top of that, I'm not sure why I would lead more towards your view because I can be saying that it's evidential towards your view. I want you to demonstrate how the evidence itself seems to be raising credence towards your view, not my view. And even then, even if truth isn't going to be like a necessary thing you must preserve in all scenarios, in every sense, given epistemology, I don't know why it's the case that foundationalism would then be ruled out. It would just be the case that we have some kind of basic beliefs at some points. We can't always access them, maybe, or it'd be the case that we can't always deploy them or use them. So I'm not sure how that even implies that my view is going to be false. And then, holy fuck, I talk so much. And then you talked about, the entire premise is that it's going to be more privileged basis for justification, given the representationalism, but you're going to be denying that. Okay, I guess privilege would just mean that you're allowed to use it, but I don't think normativity is necessarily tied into epistemology, so I'm not sure what that matters. And then you just said that it undercuts foundationalism in some sense. Number one, I want you to demonstrate that data itself sufficiently acts as the undercut towards foundationalism. I want you to demonstrate how is the case that it can be represented by the undercut. And even then, right, even the defeat does happen, why is it the case that the entire view can be false? Because it can be undercut in some sense, but undercut just means that the inference towards it is denied, which does not actually have it entail that the person is going to be false. It just means that given a set of reasons, right, it be the case that it doesn't actually lead to the conclusion. But that's not mean it's false. So yeah, go ahead.
The first thing you said, holy shit. Okay, the first thing you said is that allow me to justify why my view
Wait, hold on,
applies
chill. Your mic is
necessarily.
yeah, background noise.
All right, wait,
Try
just
to be like, I'll raise you. Don't worry.
you're saying that first thing you said was that I should justify why my view applies necessarily and counts for everything exhaustively. You also denied. Also, when you're saying why it applies necessarily, again, I still want clarity on that because unless you're just saying why, like my view negates like all the other views, foundationalism just says that knowledge or at least foundationalism relies on representationalism. We both know what foundationalism says. Representationalism says that knowledge is going to be like this attempt at accurately mirroring reality, and whatever is going to count for knowledge or these foundational beliefs are going to be the beliefs that mirror reality or stand in this special privileged relation to reality. And the way I'm using privilege there, just to clarify, is not to say that, oh, you can use it. It's to say that they have this relation that's distinct from the relation that other beliefs, which follow from that initial belief, would have to reality, such that they would have this sort of like um epistemic priority with regards to justification and being justifiers. Right. So when you say that should justify why it counts for everything exhaustively, hopefully you wouldn't really be saying that there is this third mystical view that's not foundationalist and that is not anti-foundationalist, because anti-foundationalism just serves as the negation to foundationalism, unless you're just going to be hinting at some other third view, in which case I would ask for clarity on that, because presumably the most exhaustive pair that you can have within even classical logic is going to be PNLP. That's going to be totally exhaustive. And you also asked me to justify that it can be anti-foundationalism can be derived from anti-representationalism. I already did that, but I'll just do it again. Anti-representationalism denies that there is this privileged representation that grounds all other representations, and that's the entire posit of foundationalism, right? So if that's the entire posit of foundationalism, and that is going to be something which is denied by anti representationalism by virtue of denying representationalism, then obviously the only thing you're going to be left with is anti-foundationalism, which is going to be the view that there is no quote unquote basic belief that stands in this special relation with the world, such that is going to be epistemically privileged or have epistemic priority. Um, so pretty much the let me give like this one more of a formalization to justify anti-representationalism. It's not really going to be formal. It's going to be mostly informal. The argument is just um, basic. For you to have basic beliefs, you require privileged representations, which make these basic beliefs things which are what do they call it? Things which have priority as opposed to other beliefs. That's how we get from foundationalism to requiring representationalism. So from there, you would need something like, let's say, the given, the way Sellers coined it, calls it the given, which is going to be these non-justified or these unjustified justifiers, these justifiers that don't stand within inferential relations. So what he does there is just he just makes the distinction between the space of causes and the space of reasons. The space of causes are going to be things which are non-inferential, or going to be things which cannot be just or which aren't justified. But what they do is they cause beliefs, right? So you could say that's psychological. But then the space of reasons is going to be this inferential space, such that anything which is going to be reason is going to be something that can be derived from another reason due to it being conceptual. For example, for you to say that this X justifies Y, you must already have this preconceived notion of X, and therefore know that Y follows from it, and therefore have this disposition to believe Y due to X. Right? So obviously that's going to be an inferential process. So yeah, from there, obviously you would just not be able to have this quote unquote basic belief. And if you can't have this basic belief, then you're committed to anti-representationalism. If you're committed to anti-representationalism, you're going to be committed to anti-foundationalism due to the what I've said. So what he does is he uses Sellers's myth
Wait,
of the
hold on, hold on.
given.
I want to
He
clarify
also
really quick. Like you said,
go
we
on.
can't have basic belief because of what? I didn't catch that part.
Yeah, the basic beliefs are going to be rejected because of firstly Sellers' myth of the given, which I just cast out for you, and secondly, um, this view that the mind is going to be this container and knowledge is going to be um, trying to have an accurate representation between this container and the outside world is going to be something that is historically coined, right? It's not going to be something that was quote unquote necessary for thought, something that someone invented. For example, Descartes, when he said, I think, therefore I am, blah, 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 you go on like that. It's pretty much the dogmatic image of thought, where you have thought, the mind is this container which stands in relation to the world, right? Where you have representationalism, right? So for representationalism to be the case, this um, image of thought must be presupposed and must be necessary, because anything else is not going to count as knowledge. Right? But if it is the case that this is just historically coined, then obviously it's not going to be necessary, because if it was necessary, it would have to be something which is always true, but it wasn't always true, or was made up by someone. Um, Everyone else just ran with it. But then if it's not going to be necessary, then you're just committed to anti-representationalism, because all anti-representationalism says is that there's not going to be this privileged belief. I've said it so many times, and there is not going to be this necessary standing relation, or knowledge is not going to have this necessary relationship between the mind and the outside world. And if you're denying this quote unquote mind as a container theory, then obviously you would have to replace these sorts of talks with something else, and the most plausible thing to replace it with is going to be pragmatics. So pragmatics doesn't necessarily have to rule out this quote unquote mind as a representation. What it does is that it rules out the necessity of foundationalism or of representationalism. If it's not going to be necessary, then you're just committed to anti-representationalism, and because whatever you're going to try to use is just going to be what is more useful. You said you deny normativity being tied into epistemology. I don't even know what that means. Epistemology seems to be inherently normative with regards to how you should perform or how inferential practices ought be performed. And then you also said that an undercutting rebuttal, it doesn't necessarily mean that foundationalism or anti-foundation or sorry foundationalism or representationalism is false. Okay, that just misunderstands how I use undercutting there. The way I use undercutting is just that it attacks something that is presupposed by the view, such that if foundationalism presupposes representationalism and representationalism seems to fail, then foundationalism would by extension fail. It's not to say that, oh, it just reduces like the force of the theory. I think that's all you said. If I missed anything, you could probably just say it again. Yeah, you could respond.
Yeah, so number one, one thing you said is that you can replace a mind container talk with pragmatic. It's the most plausible. Well, I don't know what plausibility is under your account. I want you to give your kind of plausibility and why its criterion seems to be coherent in nature, and why it's even the case that given the conversation, it can be used in a warranted manner. And then you did talk about how it's not going to be necessary because it was kind of coined, right? Somebody made it. But number one, I don't think the discovery talk is even going to be granted there. I think that humans just tend to, the creation talk isn't granted there. I think that humans tend to discover things by learning, and it could be the case that it pre-existed before we had knowledge on it. So it'll be the case that somebody quoting it does not mean they caused it; it just means they discovered it. It could have been the case that it's always a part of our epistemology in some sense. So it's not going to really box it on the necessity talk. So I'm not sure what that really added for anything. And then you just said the undercut, it just used to say that a text is presupposed by the view. Well, I don't know why it's the case that the presupposition is going to be necessary in nature, because you're going to be saying that the presupposition of foundationalism is going to be representationalism, and that if you attack that, it would just trivially follow that foundationalism is going to be false. But I don't think it's going to be the case that this is actually going to be a necessary condition, or sorry, a truth condition towards foundationalism. It could be the case that it's a sufficient condition towards it. So even if you attack it, it's not actually entailed that foundationalism would be false. And then you said that if we just deny the necessity talk of these basic beliefs, it's the case that we already hold into anti-foundationalism. Well, I already questioned the dichotomy there. On top of that, I don't really grant some kind of logical bivalence because you mentioned the classical system. It could be the case that there's a third option when it comes to something being true or false. It's not just true or false. I want you to motivate why it's the case, exhaustively speaking, that's going to be true or false, and not any other option. And then you said epistemology is inherently normative in regards to how inferential processes ought to be performed. Well, again, you already sneak in and out there, so that kind of just seems to be a bit circular. But regardless, I guess it could be index inferential processes, but I don't think it could be a Deontay claim towards how we process these things or how we make these processes. So I don't know where that kind of talk will come from. And then you just said that what's it called? The necessity talk. The reason why it's going to be positive is because again, like it has kind of like relationship towards the external world that must be there for it to cause our beliefs or cause knowledge. Well, I'm taking the case that again, it's going to be a necessary thing for it to exist. It's a sufficient condition, not a good condition. And on top of that, I would just say that when it comes to necessity, there, how do you put it out? When it comes to necessity, there, it could be the case that even if it's going to be weaker in some sense,
Just
right,
to clarify,
necessary.
when you say when you say you again deny it being a necessary condition but just a sufficient condition, what exactly are you referring to?
No. I said it could just be sufficient condition. It just
Yeah.
means
So
it's
what
that which can
exactly?
derive foundationalism, but the only thing that can derive it. So attacking it would actually imply that entirety is going to be false. But yeah, regardless, that's a necessity talk, right? I want to know what you mean by necessity. If you just mean true in all possible worlds, given the epistemic modality, I don't see why it's the case that existing in one or two worlds instead of these other worlds or all possible worlds will actually entail the view is false, because it would just be the case that in one world it's going to exist, necessarily speaking, or at least with obtaining this one world, but not obtain these other worlds. To be the case that it's true in that one world, it just means your count's going to be exhaustive. So I'm not sure why it'd be the case that your modal talks even must be granted and in furry kind of view. And then that's what you said, right? You just said that knowledge is an attempt at kind of like preserving truth in the most accurate form. I guess in some sense knowledge does try to do that, but I don't think that itself is going to be necessary towards knowledge. It could be the case that knowledge is just speaking about what is just, I guess, justified and largely acceptable by the agent. I wouldn't loop in truth necessarily speaking. On top of that, I don't know what you mean by truth given the conversation, right? I want you to catch out what truth means and how you aim to use it given the combo. And then basically you said that for you to have basic beliefs, you need to have this kind of priority as opposed to other beliefs for the cause of these beliefs. Well, I don't think it needs to cause every kind of belief. It could be the case that there's knowledge that does not exist. Sorry, knowledge would exist without that belief taking place or being used towards that, type of knowledge. It just means that when this things will apply towards some of our beliefs, but not all of our beliefs, it just means again your count is not going to be exhaustive. And also, getting motivated why it's the case that your views actually exhaustive of every epistemic role given the modal scope that we're positing given the conversation. You're not saying what's exhaustive towards these accounts or counterfactual theories towards your proposition being true. So I'm not sure where the abduction kind of comes from. And even then, right, if you're going to be saying that your account is abductive in some sense, which just means it's more virtuous, or maybe you're going to say that's more likely. Well, I want you to motivate why it's the case that your account just seems to be more virtuous, because they're going to kind of factual theories what you're talking about, which might be as true or at least be more virtuous than what you're talking about, right? So that means we need some kind of abductive mechanism to demonstrate why your view is one to take over these other kind of factual views. So I need that account as well. And then if you ever do use likelihood, we can get into that, but I don't think I heard you say that much, at least I believe. And then you did say that the P and not P is totally exhaustive given the classical logical system. Well, I'm not sure what you mean by totally exhaustive of the system. I don't know, maybe you mean to say that every proposition which is logical in nature would say that maybe contradictions aren't something which is granted, which I need the argument for, but regardless, I don't really have clarity in what that means or what you really aim to do given that claim. And then, past that, I think past that is the summary of most of your points. You can respond.
Okay, so first thing you asked me to do, you asked me to give my account of plausibility. So when I say plausible, or say when I say that the pragmatic talks is just going to be the most plausible account, I'm just referring to something that is going to be acceptable. Acceptable is going to fulfill the acceptability conditions, or it's going to be something that we would be warranted in adopting, given the only other, or given any other alternatives just don't seem as intuitive, and just don't seem as successful with regards to everything that we try to do there with the theories. Um, Second thing you said humans tend to discover things by learning. So it could be the case that knowledge is always representational. You realize that epistemology, or the study of knowledge, is indexical to um, humans, right? Or is going to be indexical to the way we act, right? So it's not going to be something which is objective. It's going to be something that is subjective or intersubjective, due to the fact that it's basically this societal inferential practice, or this societal inferential act, right? So when you say it was always representational, or knowledge always existed, and someone just sort of discovered knowledge, I mean, I just don't see any reasons for why anyone would hold to that. Just prima facie, and using some default logic, I'll just probably say that that's not the case. But you probably wouldn't want to say that, given that it would have to be objective if you want to say that it was always the case. But if it's subjective, then obviously. But you said you don't take representationalism to be necessary for foundationalism. Could it be the case that's just a sufficient condition, not a necessary condition? Um, Again, I would just question that, because I already explained multiple times, I believe, why representationalism is, or going to be a necessary presupposition of foundationalism. When I talk about necessity there, I'm just talking about it as a hinge assumption, which is just to say that if you're not going to be holding to representationalism, then you're not going to be holding to foundationalism, because the entire positive foundationalism, and how we get basic beliefs, quote unquote basic beliefs, to be basic within foundationalism, is just going to be this priority, which is derived from this special relation to the world. So if you're denying representationalism, we still want to be foundationalists, then there is no privileged basis for you to say that this belief is going to be on epistemically prior to all other beliefs, or is going to hold some sort of epistemic priority, right? Unless you have a view that you could take, where you would have a privileged basis that is going to be external to the representationalist account. You also questioned the dichotomy again. You said it could be the case that there's a third option. On your words, you said it could be it's not only true or false, but like I'm not even sure what you mean there, because when you say true or false, I mean, first you would have to explicate on that. All I'm saying is that anti-representationalism, or rather, all I'm saying is that representationalism is not going to be something which is necessary. Foundationalism is not going to be something which is necessary if you choose not to adopt those, or if you it is the case that they're not going to be necessary to talk about knowledge or epistemology in general, then obviously you just be left at anti-foundationalism. Like, so even for the third option, I mean, generally it would just be the case. Generally, it's the case within most logics that most things are going to be either true or false. If you have this quote unquote third option, I'll need to ask you for what it could be, because you just seem to be appealing to like vague possibilities. Or what if it could be this? Why can't it be that? Like, I need you to actually explain, because like this sort of like quote unquote wording spamming doesn't seem to actually help you out, bro. Like, what do you mean true, false, or like what else could it be if not true or false? So I need you to give the third thing, the third option,
Not my burden.
like claim it could be, and like just to show that your skepticism is going to be something that
I dismissed that.
has a basis. You could try to dismiss it. I dismiss your dismissal, but not only would you need to
Dismiss
give
you
the
back.
third option, aside from that, you'd also need to justify that this third option is going to be something which is applicable in this context. And this sort of dispute is not going to be something that's truly dichotomous, but would have to be engaged in part of like some that trichotomy. Um, you also said again that epistemology isn't going to be necessarily normative. You want me to justify why it's going to be normative. Um, Presumably, you wouldn't want to take epistemology, the study of knowledge, and justification, and everything, as something which doesn't guide action, right? Because when you're talking about you being justified in something, you're saying you have sufficient or you have good reasons to do that thing, which is inherently action guiding, right? So if you have better reasons to do something, you don't have better reasons to do something else, then you probably you probably would be warranted, or you probably would not be warranted in doing the thing which you're less justified in doing. Um, so obviously you would just have normativity in that sense. And that's just going to be built into what epistemology is. Unless you're going to be taking some idiosyncratic view upon epistemology. I also need you to justify the possibility of that if that's what you're doing. Um, Again, you like repeated your point of you saying that it's not going to be a necessary but sufficient condition for foundationalism. I think I already addressed that earlier. And you asked what I meant by necessity. I also addressed that. I said hinge assumptions, as per Wittgenstein. Um, you said you also said that knowledge being something which stands, or knowledge being the relationship between a belief and the external world, or between the mind and the representation to the external world, is not going to be necessary. So it just seems to me that you conceded there, because that's the entire representationalist view. What I was saying is that that view of knowledge being this sort of like relationship between the mind as a container and the external world is not going to be necessary. So that's what I was saying. So when you say it's not going to be necessary, you want me to motivate why it's necessary. It just seems like you've conceded there, and you're not really sure upon the topic that we're even talking about anymore. But you said it could be the case that knowledge applies to some of our beliefs and not all of them. Um, okay, so you realize that when you have epistemological theories, for example, theories of justification, right? You're going to be saying that knowledge is going to be defined by these theories of justification and theories of knowledge, by these epistemological theories that one may choose to adopt within their, um, let's say, one would choose to adopt as a set of their concepts, right? But then, like, for you to say that knowledge applies to only some of our beliefs, but not all of them, that doesn't seem to go against what I said, because I didn't say knowledge has to apply to all of our beliefs. I mean, you could believe something without knowing something, right? So, yeah, that doesn't go against what I was saying. I don't think that goes against anti-foundationalism, or it goes against anti-representationalism. You said I again haven't justified epistemic necessity in all possible epistemic worlds. So the reason I haven't done that is because I asked you for clarity on what that means. because that just seems to be a word salad. I'm not sure what you mean when you say you have that I ought to justify that the view is going to be something which is necessary within the quote unquote modal scope that we were talking about here. So I'm not even sure if it's something that needs to be justified with regards to necessity in the way that you're talking about it, because I already said multiple times that I wasn't saying that we necessarily have to adopt pragmatic talk. All I was saying is that it just seems to be the case that representational talk is disposable. And if foundationalism requires representational talk and it's not to not be something which is disposable, then it just seems to be the case that foundationalism fails by virtue of that. Then you again tried to go against the P and not P dichotomy. You said, what if there is a third option? I mean, prima facie just seems to be the case that saying X and saying everything that is not going to be X is going to be logically exhaustive, right? Unless you're saying that there is this quote unquote third option, I don't know what logic you may be appealing to. I mean, there are different logics which may or may not deny this like dichotomy, or which may or may not deny this being logically exhaustive. But you would probably want to be you would probably want to enlighten us as to what they are, right? You probably want to enlighten us as to why those logics would be things which are applicable in this context. And this let's say this specific conversation or these specific theories aren't going to be things which are truly dichotomous, even if it is the case that there are logics which have like more exhaustive or trichotomies than this dichotomy that I first provided with you. So again, I'm appealing to default logic, which I brought up earlier. Yeah, you can respond.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to clarify is I did not concede because I mentioned the exhaustion talk, but if it fails to exhaust for these possible worlds or possible scenarios, given the epistemic modal scope, then be the case that his view actually is going to be false, given that he stipulated the exhaustive talk. At least agree with me when I brought it up. So it's not going to be a concession towards my view, or sorry, concession towards your view. And well, number one, you said I have to argue for certain logics being applicable because I'm going to be questioning things like, I guess bivalence or excluded middle or some shit like that. Well, I'm not really going to have to posit this kind of factual logic to what you're saying. I'm just going to be saying, why is it the case that the assumptions of the logical system you're positing are going to be that which is granted given the conversation, right? On top of that, why are they even true? At least why can it be the case that they apply to this domain instead of staying in the logical domain, I would hope to say. And then you said that the argue is not truly dichotomous. Again, no, it's just about the possibilities because the possibility existing meaningfully would lower the credence of us positing your view to be true. So it's going to be the case that you must account for that type of thing, which is why I brought it up. It's not to say that the counterfactual actually does obtain given the domain we're talking about or given the conversation we're having. So that's going to be random. And then you said you appeal to
What?
default logic. Well, number one, I want you to tell me why is the case that you can even appeal to that and why it can actually be used for this discussion in some, I guess, successful manner, right? A meaningfully successful manner. And even then, they're going to be counterfactual logics towards that. I don't know. Default just means, I guess, some kind of like baseline assumption. But there will be logics that aren't going to be baseline assumptions. They can be like more niche in nature. So while it be the case that these systems that would, I guess, in some sense go against your system are the ones that aren't to be used, but yours is to be used. So any motivation for that. And then you said, again, initialism requires representationalism to not be disposable, or else initialism will fail by virtue of that. I think that's in question. I'm not going to repeat that. I think we've gone circular on that, so I don't need to hear about that. And then when it comes to epistemology in general, just being normative, well, number one, right? I don't think it has to be normative. Again, like it could be the case that it tends to describe how we do things, right? When it comes to our knowledge or like psychological processes. So then it'll be the case that it's not inherently action guiding, or at least it's not going to be action guiding all scenarios, which just means it could be the case I can arbitrarily assume my view is true, and that would be under the scope we're talking about. So even then, it would just defeat your view being exhaustive in any sense. Then what's it called? Necessity is some hinge assumption. Like I want clarity on what that means, but low key, I think it doesn't even matter. So I'm going to just skip by that. And then you said that generally it's the case within most logic things that are going to be truer for us. I want you to prove that. I want you to prove the quantifier as they picks out a scope, which is representative of the general logical system that exists. I want you to demonstrate how it's the case they can even infer anything from that. I want you to demonstrate how it's the case that your evaluation of doing that is that which is warranted given the conversation and truth preserving. And then even then, right, I don't know how you'd even induct that. I guess it's going to be induction given the system that exists. I want you to demonstrate how is the case that the sample itself can even be used to infer some kind of likelihood based account. It's going to be saying that given what I've seen, it's likely the case that logics would assume that. I want you to motivate how that can be used in the conversation. And then you said I need to give the third option when I deny bivalence or at least question bivalence. Well, no. Again, I already explained the possible thing and how the possibility would ground the skepticism, given that it would meaningfully incohere with your position. So I don't need to really justify it actually applies. It just needs to be, I guess, demotivated given the conversation. And you also said that. What else you said? Let me see. Yeah, you also said that given that if epistemology is going to be action guiding, inherently speaking, then you're not warranted in choosing this less justified position or action as opposed to the more justified one. Well, number one, I don't think it's going to be the case that justification itself. Well, sorry, I'm just going to question why is the case that the justification itself or its levels can be quantified in any precise and rational sense. You're going to be saying that I don't think a thing being less justified means you're unwarranted in picking it over the more justified option. I'm not sure where that would come from, why it's necessary, because if it's not going to be necessary, it could be the case that given some scenario, right, it could be the case that we could pick that less justified position yet not be completely unmotivated in doing so, completely unjustified in doing so. So I'm not sure where that comes from. And then talking to plausibility point, let me see. I think you mentioned that like plausibility just means that like it's acceptable. Well, number one, when you say acceptable, what does that mean? Number two, when you have these conditions towards acceptability, I want you to motivate how these things actually function as conditions for that instead of something else. And number three, right? I want you to tell me why it's the case that this thing even has these conditions at all, why they can be applied given the conversation. And then you said that if it fulfills those conditions, we're going to adopting that. No, I don't grant that. I want you to demonstrate how normativity actually follow from those conditions being met. And then you also said that, alternatives don't really seem as intuitive. Well, I don't know why intuition would matter, even does matter. I'm not sure why it's relevant. Even if it's relevant, I'm not sure why it would be the case that actually infers like what you're talking about is more plausible. I don't think intuition does rational work. I think intuition is just like feelings. I'm not sure why that actually plays a role given the conversation. Also, I don't think it's gonna be the case that what's it called? You mentioned like, something being successful with regards to the kind of factual theories that exist, or at least more successful. But when you say success, I want you to demonstrate how you can cash that out and what that really means given the conversation. I want you to tell me how is the case that a thing can be, I guess, unsuccessful, but not chosen by the agent, which just means you're not going to be justified in choosing that less successful option given the conversation, because I don't grant that type of quantification would exist or hold given that we're talking about. And then you also, let me see. Yeah. I think a lot of the talk was already talked about. Yeah, dichotomy dispute. Yeah, low key. Is he even saying anything else? Oh yeah, I also brought up the inferential processes later, earlier in the rec. I'm gonna flag that for the rec. But he didn't respond to that, so I don't really care about it anymore. At least when it comes to me walking back through it, and then and then you said that epistemology is indexed to the way humans act. Well, if it's just based on the way we act, then again, that would just deny it being inherently normative, because it's going to be the case that the way we act is descriptive and not prescriptive. So, it'd be the case that your view was just contradicted by you pausing that statement. And then you said you don't know why somebody hold to that. I'm not sure what your lack of knowledge on why somebody would hold to that actually matters in the conversation, and why it takes you better upon me to motivate how somebody would hold to that. So I'm not sure what that even means to do. And then again, you're trying to like assume this default logic by saying by using default logic, it's not going to be the case. So I want you to motivate how it's going to be the case that using that logic, it's not going to be acceptable. And even then, right, I put the system you're presupposing into question. And then you said that if a thing was going to be discovered, well, given that knowledge talks about like I guess you want to say is JTB, right? Given that knowledge, we're talking about knowledge, it'd be the case that it would have to always be known to the agent. Well, I'm just going to be saying that when it was discovered, we didn't have knowledge on it, but once we discovered it by learning more, it'd be the case that we had knowledge on the rep type of view. I'm showing it, by the way, it's too hard to say. And then it'd be the case that it's not actually necessarily inferred that your view, or sorry, that thing was created by a human instead of just, being a psychological structure that we have, which would then still be subjective, but not a thing which is created by a human. I don't grant that humans have causal power at all. I don't know the causality. I don't know why it applies here. I don't know why I should care about it. But yeah, you can go ahead. After this, I want to conclude low key because it's getting too long.
Yeah, it's looking getting too long, bro. I feel bad for Gyro, bro.
But Gyro, this is why Gyro is not judgment shit.
Alright, we can conclude after this. First thing he said you didn't concede to my view. I mean, I look forgot the explanation for that. You yapped for too long. I couldn't type all that out. So I'll just say, I deny that the view that you said you didn't concede. You can think that though. You asked me why it's the case that the assumptions of the logical system I'm employing are going to be granted or true. When you say true, I don't even know what that means, because I'm just going to be applying logical systems into this sort of talk. And for the question of why they are going to be applicable there, there's just that's just going to follow from the features of the systems, because the systems are going to be made to be applicable in any sense where you have like this sort of like, let's say, codification, where you have this sort of um these variables, you have this syntax, or you have this, let's say, specific formulation of something within any domain. You can apply these rules, you can apply these axioms, you can apply, I don't even hold to axioms, but you can apply the features of the logical system or the rules of the logical system. So yeah, that's why they're going to be applicable. Holy stored in spam, bro. But like, why the assumptions of the logical system are going to be granted or two. You don't have to grant them. Those are just going to be what we call hinge assumptions. The hinge assumptions aren't going to be things which are necessarily part of a specific logical system. I take it to be the case that most, if not all, logical systems share the same assumptions as I do for the most part. Even for the ones where you say, "Oh, why does it they have a third option?" I don't hold it to I don't hold to it being the case. For example, let's say dialetheism. Obviously, not every single proposition is going to be that which is a dialetheia, right? It's not going to be something which can be true and false. So I just hold to that being the case for the other logical systems. Since you can't really specify any logical system, I'll just hold to it being the case that you don't know any logical system that fulfills these conditions that you're trying to employ, but would just be the case that you're trying to appeal to them nonetheless. So I'll just dismiss that based off of that. You asked me to justify the applicability of default logic. Default logic just models how we reason non-monotonically, which is just operating on the limited knowledge that we have, or at least operating on the limited resources that we have until we come across more resources, or until we come across a reason to leave that specific method of operation and switch to one which is more useful. So pretty much the entire thing or everything depends upon success, or it depends upon pragmatics, right? Which was again why it's going to be something which is more plausible to replace the representational talk with after earlier. Pragmatics are just going to be things which seem to warrant the way we actually engage within these sorts of philosophical topics and these sorts of philosophical discourse. Presumably, one wouldn't want to say that one wouldn't want to adopt something that wouldn't be useful to them, or something that serves no use to them, just strictly because of some, let's say, a priori theoretical virtuous nonsense, right? It just seems to be that what they call it, pragmatics or usefulness is going to be the main driving motor of the way we reason and the way we function. You said I should justify default logic over the views which go against it. I don't take it to be that any views actually go against default logic, or any non-monotonic views go against default logic. If you want me to justify non-monotonicity over monotonicity, which is the case that monotonicity fails to capture the way we actually reason, the way we function, um, due to the fact that I can't model fucking uncertainty, it can't model incomplete information. It assumes full exhaustivity, which is again why I said I don't have to be like totally exhaustive, quote unquote. I just have to show that your or foundationalism or representationalism is not going to necessarily fall into anti-foundationalism, anti-representationalism. So again, yeah, I'm not holding to monotonicity. That's so any view which goes against default logic will probably just be a monotonic view. I don't want to be in the case that any non-monotonic view goes against default logic, since it's just the case that all default logic posits is that you reason normally until you have a reason to not reason in the fashion that you're reasoning. And you continue to reason like that, and so on. You said why can't it just be the case that we disregard normativity in epistemology just aims at describing the way that we reason and the way that we function. I mean, sure, I could grant that it does reason the way that we function and blah blah blah. But the point is, every epistemic theory has these sorts of standards for correctness, right? Even foundationalist theories, anti-foundationalist theories, they have these rules and these action guiding things where you say if someone, like, let's say, uses a stupid inference rule that they just made up called modus penis, for example, and they claim it to be part of classical logic whilst operating within classical logic, you probably call them wrong for using that sort of inference, for committing that sort of inference. You probably see they're in error due to violating the rule. I'm not committing myself to any sorts of objective norms, which is why I said everything was to be grounded within societal practice. All right. And so you asked me for why what I said would be useful, or what I said about being prima facie would be useful, um, or applicable. Obviously, I said I hold to default logic, right? I already justified default logic. I said, based off of what I know, I'm going to continue to reason because the way I reason is trivially going to be something that has to be successful. And this success is going to be something which is private to me. And this private nature is going to be something which makes it acceptable for me to continue reasoning in this way due to the default logic, nature of the default logic and not other non-monotonic systems. Um, you said you don't have to justify the third option, you're just positing as an alternative. But I already did put that into question. I gave reasons for why I would dismiss that third option, given that you don't seem to know what the third option is. You want me to magically conjure up a third option, or at least I'll just be rejecting the private language there, because it seems like you just want me to conjure up a third option and then refute it for you. I'm not going to do that, right? Just doesn't seem like something which is plausible. It doesn't seem as like something which a rational agent would do, given the context. He said it holds a justification being quantified in a rational sense. What I was saying when I said that you would be unwarranted in choosing like the less justified option, I was just saying you'd be less warranted because you could say that a justification is going to be something which is quantified however you want to quantify justification. Actually, if you want to say that justification is going to be things which come in degrees or come in credences, such that it could be less justified, it could be more justified. If you want to say that you're either justified or not, if you're going to be less justified, you're going to be less warranted. If you're going to be more justified, you're going to be more warranted, because justification is going to be, let's say, in very, very simple terms, is going to be a measure of warrant, right? You asked me what acceptable means, and I was talking about acceptability conditions. Talk about acceptability conditions, just talking about the conditions for which, um, let's say, adopting a view or adopting a theory would not be faulted towards the agent. For example, I wouldn't have
You
any
can
fault
conclude
for
when you're
adopting
done.
this theory. Yeah, sure, we can conclude after. I'm just saying I wouldn't be at fault for fucking adopting, bro. You made me lose my train of thought. But I wouldn't be at fault for adopting this view given the context, given um my rational mental states, as well as my dispositions, as well as my background knowledge and my conceptual scheme. Right. So you asked me to motivate the acceptability conditions. The acceptability conditions are very trivial. If it's something that's useful, then if it's something that's useful to me, then obviously I wouldn't be at fault for continuing to use it, since it just seems to be the case that the way every rational agent functions is just to at least um, get the most useful theory, or at least something that's going to be most useful to them. And even when you say that you're a representationalist, it just seems to be the case that those who adopt representationalism also being the case that representationalism is going to be more useful than anti-representationalism, which is why they alter in the first place. So again, that's why again I don't have to hold to any sort of like epistemic necessity, blah 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 blah. Just be the case that representationalism fails in the strict sense. If it fails in the strict sense, you're anti-representationalist. Say as just by the applicability of the acceptability conditions. Acceptability conditions are going to be applicable in um every single domain of discourse where you're trying to find out what view to adopt, or in any sort of like domain where you're trying to inquire about what view to adopt, what view not to adopt, and whether or not this view is going to be better than another view, or you're going to be warranted in adopting this view over another view. Yeah, you would trivially fall back onto acceptability conditions. That's just independent of any justificatory theory, right? Because um, we're talking about anti-foundationalism against foundationalism. So obviously, you wouldn't want to appeal to any of these things in order to not go circular epistemically. You said you deny intuitions. I mean, sure, you could deny intuitions prima facie based off of what I've seen. Intuitions seem to be things which favor me, things which are useful to me, so they will be acceptable, as well as intuitions are just like the driving motor of like everyone with indications of their seemings and their defeasible justifiers. Right? It's if it seems to be the case intuitively that this is going to be more useful, then I'm going to be warranted, or I can, um, be warranted in accepting this thing. And using warrants here is not going to be using it as a justifier, blah blah blah. Bro, I've been talking for a lot. So I should motivate my reasoning for default logic entailing what I said. That just trivially follows from what default logic is. I explained default logic, so yeah. Saying you said we don't have knowledge. You said prior we didn't have knowledge, but discovered knowledge. But that just seems to be like highly implausible given what I've told you prior, as well as the fact that you're literally saying that we didn't have knowledge on knowledge prior to discovering knowledge of knowledge through knowledge, right? Knowledge just seems to be this societally constructed thing. Right? Unless you have this account where you say knowledge existed prior to societal construction, because knowledge is also something that's only applicable to rational agents. So rational agents are the ones who construct this knowledge. They do construct this knowledge, then like this societal practice. Obviously, it would just be the case that it's not going to be something which is objective. It'll be subjective. It'll be intersubjective. It wouldn't be objective. It wouldn't be mind independent. I think that's all you said. Because I didn't take notes on anything else. I'm not gonna lie to you. You were yapping for way too long. But yeah, we can conclude after this. If you made any other points which I may have missed, I'm going to be denying these points right now on rec. So Gyro, you can take note of that as well. Thank you.
Is
Do
that
you
your
want to give
conclusion?
closing statements, or do you want to like just end the rec because it's like pretty
Yeah,
long?
hold on, but is that your conclusion? You would say?
No, that was my final response. I mean, if you want to give a closing statement, you can give a closing statement. But if
Yeah, because I'm gonna just get my closing, so just new points and respond to it. So
no, don't
you
respond.
said the
If
systems
you're
are going
giving
to
it,
be
wait,
made
wait, wait,
applicable
wait,
due to
wait, wait, wait,
syntax and formulations, so
wait,
we can apply those based on that. I don't grant that. On top of that, I'm taking the case that it actually models our reasoning. I'm
I'm
taking the case
denying
that reasoning
everything
is going to be
he's saying right now,
consistent.
by the way, because
I'm denying even
that's
now,
not a closing
infinitely speaking.
statement.
So every time you say that, I'm going to
I'm
deny that. So I
denying
want to
you're
demonstrate how
denying
it's
infinitely
possible that you can
speaking as
deny what I'm
well. So
talking
what is
about.
this you're
And
talking
demonstrate how
about?
it's going to be
Bro,
applied
this
to
is
your
not a
approach. I
closing
actually hold this.
statement. Do
I'm
you
going
know
to
what a
demonstrate how it's
closing
going to be the case
statement
that
is?
actually
What is
chaos
this
analysis can be happening
rapping?
even
What
the
the
conversation we're
fuck?
having about, regardless of what I'm regardless of
Holy
the logical
fucking
system. So
shit.
I'll take the case that the way we reason itself can
Bro,
be
what are
modeled
you
after in
saying?
some accurate sense, so even the mathematical system.
I deny
Number
all of
two,
this
I'll
again,
take
by
the
the way.
case that
Yeah.
hints assumptions are conceptually adopted given conversations. Again,
I'll
I don't
hope
know
you
why it's
just save the
coherent. I don't
record.
know why it's true. I'm going to
I
OBS
deny all of
code.
this, by the way. I'm
I'm
denying
going to
all of this
OBS.
again. Not
I
everything
responded to
that he
that.
said
He
within his
responded back
closing
to me.
statement
I deny his
within
statement
my
now. On top
closing
of that, I
statement.
want you to motivate
You
why it's
could end
possible
it,
to deny me.
yes, but I
On
have
top
the
of that, I want
power,
you to
right?
know
So
why
it
it's the
doesn't
case
really
that even it's
matter. I'm
possible
going
that
to
using
send
it
this
here.
shit
Then
to
want to tell me why it's the
Gyro
case that even
after.
uses it here is actually warranted. Want to be the case or provides the case that actually was is going to be warranted and actually provokes a response from me because I'm going to either. On top of that, when it comes to logical system, I'm going to be the case that actually models our
You
reasoning to
don't
motivate
have
that.
to adopt
On top of that, I'm
everything,
going to
by
be the
the way.
case
They're
that
just
the
going to
model,
be
yeah,
trivially
so the
acceptable.
adopting
So
just
I'm not
means
making any
warranting.
such
I don't grant
normative
trivially
claims.
acceptable. I don't grant that at all. I'm going to demonstrate how to. On top of that, when it comes to the modeling part, I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
think
not making
psychology
any
can be
sorts of
modeled for in
normative
some
claims,
accurate
so
way,
that's
so
all
it's
I'm
going to
trying to
just
say.
falsify your
Yeah.
position. On top of that, I don't
It doesn't
grant
falsify
hints,
anything
assumptions as
because
a
I didn't even
concept that
say
we
that
should
it's going to
adopt
be something
here.
which is true or
I don't grant it
false. You
makes
didn't
sense. I don't
clarify
grant the
if it's true
semantics
or false
themselves
already.
as they have constant meaning. I don't grant it can be inferred in the domain of discourse happening right now. On top of that, you say that when it comes to these other systems, all these systems tend to share these kind of same assumptions that you do. I'm to motivate that and how you know that and how you have knowledge on that. How is it because you even evaluate that? Well, the evaluation itself is going to be virtuous given the type of task we're going to be having. On top of that, you saying that since I can't specify, I don't
Or
have any
like
knowledge to motivate how
this
that
was
actually falls,
literally
given I
class,
don't
bro.
specify it. On top of that, I don't know why it's the case that you can dismiss what I'm talking about, even if I'm appealing to it. I don't know how I'm appealing to it. I'm to
Yeah,
motivate how.
you don't
But
have
if I'm
to
appealing
hold
to
to
it in
that
some
being the
thin
case.
sense, I'm not sure what that's meaningful
Trivially,
here.
I'm
As
going to be
infers
dismissing that
anything you
though,
can make
and
or
that
use
wouldn't be
against me
something which is part
in
of
the
the
conversation.
dialectic, given what
I
I
dismiss that as
said.
well. Anyways,
Bro,
I don't grant that
and
default
Jared, at
logic
this
models
point,
the way
this
we
is
reason.
basically
And
just
even if it
trolling, bro.
does
Like,
model
should
the
I
way
end
that
the
we
rec?
reason, I'll take the case
Like,
that
I'm gonna
it
end the
models it in
rec.
a meaningful sense, which is then universally
You can
speaking,
continue
just be
recording, but like, no
capturing
one's
of
gonna
our
take this part
entire
seriously. Please, Jared,
psychological
don't take
structures
that
or how we
whole
use in
part
general.
seriously.
On top of that, I don't know
I
why it's the
did
case that we
deny
must
everything
need
he
a
said.
particular reason to
Right
switch to
after
another
I
one.
said I denied
Number one,
everything he
I
said, the
don't
debate
again, I
can
don't grant
actually end it. So
usefulness
don't worry
being
about
an
that.
acceptability condition towards something. It can be the
Yeah, I'm
case that
going to
we
save the
observe
rec
it
now.
theoretically speaking, but not actually observe it or
Yeah,
try to use it in reality because it's
I
going to be different
denied
from reality because
everything.
what is
Infinitely
used in reality
speaking,
is
the debate
different from what's
ended. I
theoretical in
don't need this
nature
to be part
and
of the
rational
debate.
coherence. So
So
again,
he can
pragmatics are
continue
not going to
rambling
be
to
that which is
himself.
continue his
monologue. That's just not going to be something that's part of the dialectic.
I'm just gonna be the case that
so yeah,
if it's gonna be not useful, that we don't accept that, and that's the driving motor. I don't get that at all. I want you to prove that. Like, how you prove it. Why does that count as motivation for your view instead of my view? And also, you said you and take needs to be the case that any
you don't even have a view.
Logic. I don't know why the case that actually applies to when we're talking about. Why is the case that actually fails to capture the way we reason? Why is not capture it better than the system? Why is it going to fail in some exhaustive account? On top of that, why can't it,
are you like
recording
on
exhaustion?
OBS?
I think that's the case I am. I don't know why it's the case that the way you use it.
Are you recording on OBS?
I'm not sure what that criterion for success actually obtained.
Holy fucking
I don't know why it's the case
bro.
that if it's towards you actually warrants it being acceptable in general. We can talk to what we're having. You're going to be saying that because it's going to be rational cadence towards your view instead of my view. So, yeah, you would need to motivate that as well. I don't know what's the case that we wouldn't be at fault given the epistemology. I don't know what's going to be the case that I could have negation be at fault. I don't know what's the case that your views are
bro, can someone end the recording?
I don't know what's the case that the big condition is going to be very trivial.
Can someone end the recording?
To what's useful to you. I don't get, again, that this relation towards you actually motivates a thing being used in conversation.
Yeah, someone end the recording.
I don't get that
so I wouldn't for ending the recording.
I don't know why it would be. I don't know why you think
humans
just means that them in a discourse.
It's
going to be used. And also, I dismiss all your points. I don't know what's the case that, rational agents functions to get the most useful theory, necessarily speaking. I don't know how the technically can be argued for that. I'm not sure what the case actually applies in the conversation on the plate. I don't know how you would actually evaluate that. And because also when it comes to your concept of that. And also, I don't take it to be the case that any entailment that anything you said is some entailment to demonstrate the case that it's impossible to not infer your conclusion. I want to demonstrate how is the case the default logic can be used here. And talk about this to conclude. I gave meta evidence, he didn't respond to that. I talked about the possibilities of ground substance for Born, he didn't respond to that.
None of this is part of the debate, by the way. Like, just to be clear, none of this is part of the debate.
I think I could obtain, he didn't want to be that
part of the debate.
Go against that. I also denied inheritance or say no validity for epistemology, he didn't go against that as well. And then this
nigga asked us to conclude right after I responded.
He didn't address my framing, what's objective. Again, I'm denying those points. I also didn't address my private and concept because I need to hold you all.
After we supposedly already concluded
that which is applied. Did I actually respond to that? That's one point. Sorry. The response to not being quantified. Didn't respond to it being justified at all to pick that which is less justified because it's justified, but not really unjustified in general. You can also make the swings knowledge between where it's a necessarily psychological thing instead of something we didn't fully consciously know, given the type of epistemology we have. And so that he didn't demonstrate how it actually infers that
that's
it would
all,
be cause and nature. It could be the case that it's just discovered.
That's all, bro.
But
it's all,
I guess
bro.
in some sense, the reason we have for it can be caused.